This is the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 28th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. After the Sabbath, as the first day of the week was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord, descending from heaven, came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. For fear of him the guards shook and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here, for he has been raised, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has been raised from the dead, and indeed he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him. This is my message for you." So they left the tomb quickly with fear and great joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them and said, "Greetings." And they came and took hold of his feet and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." The Gospel of the Lord. So the story of the resurrection is the central story of our faith. We read the story every year at Easter, and we refer back to it each and every Sunday. It's such a well-known story that even people who are not Christian and have never been inside a church can probably tell you the essence of the story. That Christians believe that Jesus, who once was dead, is now alive again. But each of our four Gospels tells the story a little bit differently. And while the basics are the same, each has details that are not found in the others. So today, we've read Matthew's story of the resurrection of Jesus. And Matthew mentions things that nobody else does. For instance, Matthew says that there were soldiers guarding the tomb. No other tradition says that. Matthew alone says that there was an earthquake on Easter Sunday morning. Now, earthquakes are not unusual in that part of the world, but it's not mentioned anyplace else. And Matthew alone says that the earthquake was caused by an angel who descended from heaven and rolled away the stone. Which means that Matthew is the only gospel to explain how the stone got moved, because all of the rest simply say the stone was already moved when the women arrived at the tomb. But to me, here is the strangest part of Matthew's story. When the angel rolls the stone away from the tomb, Jesus doesn't come out. He isn't in there. He's gone. He's already been raised. "Come, see the place where he lay," the angel says to the women, but he's not there anymore. And so the reason for the stone being rolled away from the entrance to the tomb is not to let Jesus come out, as though, maybe he needed a little bit of help. Instead, the point of moving the stone is to show the women what God had already done, and that Jesus was already alive again. See, the stone is rolled away not for Jesus, but for his disciples. And the empty tomb and the rolled-away stone are intended to be signs of hope and new life for the followers of Jesus. But it's clear in that moment that the women and the rest of the disciples didn't quite experience it in that way. After all, the women run from the tomb with fear as well as great joy. In fact, fear is the first emotion that Matthew mentions, and it's a common reaction across the resurrection narratives. And it's not hard to understand why fear may have gotten in the way of the women experiencing this pure joy and hope. Because after all, the women had just seen an angel. And angels are really scary things in the Bible. They are not these cute little Hallmark cherubs that we see on the cards. Angels always scare everybody. I mean, so much so that armed soldiers are paralyzed to death and can't move. It would be hard for anybody not to be afraid, even if the angel says, "Hey, don't be afraid." it's still scary. The women are doing pretty well if they can get up and run afterwards. It's a scary moment. And the women had just experienced an absolutely surreal moment. I mean, the angel came down, shook the earth, rolled the stone away. Have you ever seen an angel come down, appear in front of you, roll a stone away? Well, they had neither. This was surreal to them. I mean, it must have seemed like a scene out of the Twilight Zone. And it's really hard to feel joy and hope when what's happening around you seems so surreal. And the women had presumably done what the angel said, and they had looked inside the empty tomb. But what they saw was emptiness and a place of death. That's what tombs are. And it would be a while before they could look into an empty place of death and reimagine it as a place of hope and new life. In the end, though, the disciples came to experience the presence of the risen Jesus in their lives. He could appear and vanish from locked rooms and be in multiple places at once. And it became clear that Jesus didn't need the stone rolled away so that he could get out of the tomb. The rolled away stone and the empty tomb were really for his followers, to show them that hope and life win out, even over fear and death. And as we celebrate Easter, I'm sometimes worried that we make Easter all about Jesus rising to new life. And of course, that sounds strange because it is about Jesus being raised from the dead. But it's much more than that. We're not just celebrating an historical event for one person. Instead, Jesus' resurrection is a sign and promise of the hope and the new life that God gives to each and every one of us through Jesus. And so, like the rolled away stone, it's really important, especially now, that we understand the resurrection of Jesus as a sign of God's promise of new life to us, as well as to Jesus. And so, like the rolled away stone, it's important that Jesus' resurrection reminds us that there is more to our future than the pain of the moment. But as with the women at the tomb, that's not always as easy as it sounds for us either in this particular moment of our life. For just like them, right now, we are facing something really frightening. We're living through a pandemic, which has already killed a lot of people and still threatens many more. And it's hard not to be afraid and not to have that fear override everything else. Just like those women, right now we too are facing a surreal moment, unlike anything we have ever known. I mean, almost every day we get up, we walk around, and we think, this can't be happening, this is weird. At some point, right after we had the stay-at-home order, one of our folks was emailing with me, and she said, you know, some of the Gaithersburg Help people have been given letters to carry around with them when they're doing deliveries or they're picking up food or taking prescriptions to people, so that in case they're asked or stopped, they can say, here, look, we're doing something that's legally allowed. And the governor's order did say you may do that, you don't have to, but a lot of people wanted that, and so they're walking around or they're driving around carrying these letters, and she says to me, you know, people driving around in our own country with letters giving them permission to travel. That seems so surreal. And I emailed back to her and I said, it seems surreal because it is surreal. I mean, every day there's something like that going on in our lives, and it's hard to focus on hope and promise and new life when everything is so surreal. And you know, just like those first women at the tomb, day after day, we are looking at the statistics of death and living in isolation from one another. Death and emptiness. Those are what we see also when we look around us. And it's hard for us too to be able to see hope and joy and new life. And so this Easter, perhaps more than any other in recent memory, we need to remember that the resurrection is a sign of new life and hope for us. just as the empty tomb and the rolled-away stone were for those first women. And we need to celebrate the resurrection as God's sign and God's promise to us, and not just as something that happened to Jesus long ago. For Jesus' resurrection is the sign and the promise that Jesus is with us even and especially when we're feeling alone and afraid. The resurrection is the sign and the promise that God is bringing about new life among us, even when things seem surreal. And the resurrection is the sign and the promise that God's gift of new life always wins out over the power of death.